William Marshall published 6 books of tunes in his lifetime. Well, no, he didn't. He published 5. One was posthumous, but there were 6 altogether. And the most important one is the 1822 collection, which had 174 tunes, no fewer in it. And it was dedicated to the Marchioness of Huntly. I'm going to play the first tune from the book, The Marchioness of Huntly Strathspey. Then I'll tell you a little bit about who she was. She was Elizabeth Brodie of Brodie House. She was born in 1794. She was 28 when this collection was published. She married the Marquis of Huntly, Lord George Gordon, and that's why she was the Marchioness, obviously. She was a fine player of Scots music. Sir Walter Scott heard her in Edinburgh, and he wrote, "Lady Huntly plays Scots tunes like a Highland angel. She ran a set of variations which I told her were enough to raise a whole countryside. I never in my life heard such fire thrown into that sort of music." Well, William Marshall travelled to Edinburgh by permission of the Duke to supervise the publication of his book. And this he did at considerable expense. He paid for it himself. And he wrote to his son, William, Colonel William, whom we've heard of before, when the book was ready. He wrote this: "My dear William, I am just arrived from Edinburgh, where I have been for nearly 4 months, getting my music engraved and printed, which I have accomplished at cost and considerable load of trouble and expense, perhaps between £300 and £400, a lot of money. I was induced to publish at the earnest request of the Duffs, and in particular the Marchioness of Huntly, to whom I have dedicated the work, and which I am happy to say has given in general a deal of satisfaction, notwithstanding the heavy expense. It will bring in between £400 and £500 profit, if payment of all the books I have printed is forthcoming." So he supervised the whole thing, the engraving of the prints, the arrangements that were made, and so forth and so on. When it was published, the book was entitled Marshall's Scottish Airs, Melodies, Strathspeys, Reels for Pianoforte, Harp, Violin, Violoncello, with appropriate basses. And the title page looked like this. There it is. Well, it was a success, and he did make a lot of money out of it, and that was fortunate. No, it wasn't fortunate, it was a good thing. Since the Marchioness was so important in the book, I think I'll play 2 more tunes which are connected to her and which have her name in the titles. And the first one is the Marchioness of Huntly's favourite. This may in fact have been her favourite tune of this kind anyway. It's a slow strathspey, and Marshall has indicated on the music that it is slow and pathetic. So I shall play it slowly and as pathetically as I can manage. quite melancholy, let's cheer ourselves up. This is the Marchioness of Huntly's favourite jig. Our favourite jig. And it's a jolly tune, so maybe it was her favourite jig. The book was successful in Scotland. It was also successful worldwide. The Marquess and Marchioness, by the way, bought 700 copies of it. So that was it off to a good start. And presumably they distributed these to other noble families, friends, relations, and anyone who happened to be passing, perhaps, if they'd any left. Anyway, copies went worldwide. They went all over the place. Remember, this is the time of empire, and there were Scottish people all over the world serving their country in different ways. And so we have a letter here from John Stewart, Mr. John Stewart, who was a director of the East India Company, and he writes this: "My dear Sir, I sent you from Bombay the end of last month a list of subscribers for 121 copies of your music, and have the pleasure to enclose the second of the bill for £75 12 and 6pence, in case my letter above mentioned, which gave cover to the first of the bill, should miscarry. Both Mrs. Stewart and myself have of late been somewhat ailing, and we come to pass a month on this island for the change of air," this island being Ceylon, by the way, or Sri Lanka. They're in Galley. "And which I think has already operated favourably in the health of both. We expect to be again in Bombay by the 1st of December. Well, John Stewart helped Marshall by buying a lot of copies and giving them away to other people that he knew. And so let's hear Mr. John Stewart's reel of Bombay. Mr. John Stewart's reel of Bombay. He was, by the way, the brother of Major L. Stewart, Major Ludwig Stewart, a tune featuring whom we heard earlier on. Notes on that, but it's how he wrote it. Finally, one more subscriber. Not quite such a grand person as the ones we've heard of. She was Mrs. Major Mitchell, and she bought a lot of copies, only 24. Presumably majors didn't earn as much as directors of the East India Company and major aristocrats, but her tune is a lovely one. So here is Mrs. Major Mitchell Strathspey to round off this very small selection from this large and successful book. The 1822 collection.